One night, 4 armed robbers stormed through the front door. Within seconds, the entire place exploded into chaos. One of the gunmen pointed his weapon at me, and he pulled the trigger 4 times. 1 minute, I'm pouring drinks behind the bar. The next minute, somebody's trying to murder me. By the grace of God, none of those rounds hit me. Several customers immediately fought back. So did I. Together, we disarmed the gunmen and held 3 of the stick-up men until the police arrived.
The Voice of Gotham with Pat Brosnan.
I'm Pat Brosnan, and this is the Voice of Gotham, Heroes of New York, and this is the real Bronx Tale. Last week, I told you the story of the 2 biggest monsters I ever hunted, Thomas Cross and Philippe Concepcion. That was their story. Tonight is different. Tonight is personal. This is my story. People know the headlines. They know about the 1,000 criminals I locked up, the 500 guns taken off the streets, 130-something medals, the New York State Medal of Valor, the New York State Police Officer of the Year. They know about the security company I built from my basement into one of the largest in America. They know about television, consulting, counter-drone technology, the Archangel Blue Foundation, and the Save a Child program. But those are just headlines. They don't tell you who I am. They don't tell you why I became a cop. They don't tell you why, more than 40 years later, I still wake up every morning thinking about public safety, crime, terrorism, and protecting innocent people. To understand all of that, you have to go back to the beginning. Long before the badge, long before the gun, long before the detective shield. Back to an Irish kid growing up in the Bronx. I was born at St. Vincent's Hospital and raised by my parents, John and Kathleen Brosnan. Like so many Irish families who came to America, they believed in hard work, faith, personal responsibility, and helping your neighbors. The Bronx I grew up in wasn't perfect, but it was home. And little by little, that world started disappearing. First, heroin, then crack cocaine. The drugs didn't just destroy addicts, they destroyed families, they destroyed neighborhoods, they destroyed hope. I watched buildings burn, businesses close, good families move away. The neighborhood I loved was slowly becoming occupied by fear. The hardest part was watching it happen to people I knew. 5 close friends of mine died from drug overdoses, mostly methadone. 5. Then it became even more personal. My older brother, John, became addicted to heroin. Watching somebody you love lose that battle is something you never forget. Addiction doesn't just destroy the person using drugs, it wounds every member of the family. And eventually my brother was killed after being struck by a train. He was only 37 years old. People ask me all the time, Pat, what made you become a cop? Well, that's the answer. Not one event, not one conversation, not one television show. It was the accumulation of everything I'd seen happening around me. I loved my neighborhood. I refused to accept what was happening to it. I wanted to fight back. I just hadn't figured out how. At the time, I was attending Lehman College in the Bronx, earning my bachelor's degree in English and professional writing. I loved writing, I loved history, and I loved telling stories. But life has a funny way of changing your plans. To help pay my way through college, I tended bar at a rough little South Bronx tavern called the Jolly Tinker. It wasn't exactly a country club. It was the kind of neighborhood bar where you learned to read people pretty quickly. One night, 4 armed robbers stormed through the front door. Within seconds, the entire place exploded into chaos. One of the gunmen pointed his weapon at me, and he pulled the trigger 4 times. 1 minute, I'm pouring drinks behind the bar. The next minute, somebody's trying to murder me. By the grace of God, none of those rounds hit me. Several customers immediately fought back. So did I. Together, we disarmed the gunmen and held 3 of the stick-up men until the police arrived. Looking back now, it's amazing how life can change in just a few minutes. Those robbers walked into the Jolly Tinker looking for money, What they really did was change the direction of my life forever. That night, I met Detective Ralph Friedman for the first time. If you know anything about the South Bronx during those years, you know Ralph's name. He wasn't a television detective. He wasn't pretending. He was the real deal, a hunter of violent criminals. He didn't recruit me. He didn't tell me I should become a cop. He didn't give me a speech about duty or a speech about honor. He simply did his job. He went up on a ladder and with a small knife carved out the 4 bullets that were in the ceiling. No drama, just calm professionalism in the middle of absolute chaos. That made an enormous impression on me. Riding my motorcycle home that night, I replayed every second in my mind. The gunshots, the fear, the decision to fight back instead of surrendering. Then watching Ralph and his fellow detectives restore order to a scene that had been completely out of control only minutes earlier. Somewhere between the Jolly Tinker and my front door, my future became crystal clear. I wasn't going to spend my life writing about other people's stories. I was going to live one. And a few months later, in January of 1983, I raised my right hand and became a New York City police officer. One of life's great ironies is that my first night on patrol, August 1st, 1983, was the exact same night Ralph Friedman was involved in a devastating accident, responding to a 1013 that forced him to retire on disability. One Bronx detective walked off the street, and another Bronx kid stepped onto it. I had absolutely no idea what the future held. I didn't know about the gunfights. I didn't know about the medals. I didn't know about the 1,000 felons who would eventually wind up in handcuffs. And I also didn't know I'd someday build one of the largest security companies in America. I didn't know any of that. All I knew was that I needed to be in the fight. Looking back today, that really was the beginning. Everything that happened afterward, the South Bronx, the 46th Precinct, the Robbery Squad, the Park Avenue Posse, Thomas Cross, Philippe Concepcion, the apartment invasion, the home invasion that ended my career, and everything I've done since started with 4 gunshots inside a little neighborhood bar called the Jolly Tinker. They became chapters of my life, and it all started inside the Robbery Squad. When I got to the Robbery Squad, I felt like I finally found where I belong. Everything I'd learned as a young cop on the streets of the South Bronx had prepared me for this. One of the biggest problems we faced in those years was the explosion of armed taxicab robberies. In 1990 alone, 31 New York City taxi drivers were murdered. 31. It was madness. I'd actually driven a cab myself in the South Bronx while I was in college, so I understood exactly what those drivers went through. Every time somebody climbed into the back seat, you wondered if this passenger was going to pay the fare or pull out a gun. That always stayed with me. My partner, Eddie Murphy, and I decided we weren't going to keep chasing one robbery at a time. We wanted to attack the entire problem. Eddie was really smart on computers and technology, and he developed what became known as the Taxi Safety Program. We built intelligence files, photographic arrays, data on patterns, confidential informant files, where they were operating, and how the bad guys selected the victims. We started connecting dots that nobody had connected before. And then one day I was riding with the chairman of the Taxi and Limousine Commission. He had asked to do a ride-along because some of the work we were doing to support the taxi cab drivers. And we wanted to demonstrate to him some of the drivers and some of the dangers that the taxi drivers faced. We'd have to wait very long. As it turned out, a passenger climbed into the cab and carrying a fully loaded .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. I disarmed him right there in front of the commissioner. He couldn't believe it. It was, couldn't believe what he just witnessed. I could. We recovered numerous illegal handguns from violent passengers all the time, and in all likelihood saved quite a few taxi drivers' lives. And that's always been the most satisfying part of police work. Not the arrests, the lives you never know that you saved. That was what was important to me, because every gun that you took out of the waistband or out of the hands of a bad guy prevented untold misery, untold horror for future victims. And then along came one of the biggest investigations of my career, the Park Avenue Posse. These were not ordinary street criminals. These were violent predators responsible for robberies, shootings, and murders, including the murder, in later years, of street crime police officer Kevin Gillespie. As a young detective in the 46th Precinct Robbery Squad, I caught the case on the Park Avenue Posse. It started with what looked like yet another armed robbery. 3 armed Hispanic males stuck up a neighborhood bodega on 188th Street. During the robbery, one of the employees was shot in the leg. Amazingly, the same gunman had robbed that same bodega 3 times in the last month and twice in the prior week. The owner's name was Onesimo Sanchez. And after spending time with him, I finally convinced him to help us conduct surveillance. We didn't use an unmarked police car. We used my own personal van. Myself and my partners, Detective John Fleming and Kevin Tracy, we hunted endlessly with these gunmen, with the victim hidden in the back of my dirty and very nondescript van. It blended in perfectly, actually. Waiting, hunting, and eventually the patience paid off. The witness spotted one of the suspects, and we had him. He was easy. We pulled him right out of his mother's apartment, and we snatched up a few more. And then Joey Aponte. He turned out to be a bit of a problem. My partner Kevin Tracy and I moved in on him in his half-sister's apartment in the 48th Precinct. Kevin kicked the door in while I was out on the fire escape. It was, of all things, a snow blizzard, 20 inches of snow, and Joey exploded through the window, and we both went down 20 feet into the snow. That arrest broke the investigation open. Now we knew who we were hunting. The ringleader was Joey Aponte, but some clown judge released him on low bail. Unbelievably, and against all odds, some clown judge released him on low bail, and he went back out on the street. He went on a rampage. He murdered 6 people in the Bronx, including shooting a store owner on Castle Hill Avenue 3 times in the chest during a stick-up. He was an absolute madman on a rampage. He was really a mad dog killer. And then, really one of the most extraordinary coincidences in my entire career, and against all the odds in the universe, on one Saturday night, while I just went off duty, was buying the Sunday Daily News on 188th Street and the Grand Concourse, and I was the eyewitness from maybe 20 feet away of Joey Aponte executing a man standing at a payphone on the corner of 188th Street and the Grand Concourse. 1 second, the victim was live. The next second, he was dead. I immediately went after Aponte on foot, weaving across 8 lanes of traffic on the Grand Concourse, trying to keep him in sight and trying to get a shot at him. But I couldn't, and eventually I lost him. He jumped in the car and took off. But now, we knew exactly what kind of killer we were dealing with. Weeks later, we received information that Aponte and members of his crew were attending a showing of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 at the Paradise Theater in the Bronx on the Grand Concourse. The Paradise wasn't just any movie theater. It was an old ornate theater with a whole upper opera section overlooking the main floor. The team, John Fleming and Kevin Tracy, quietly moved into position, camouflaged in usher jackets. The movie was playing. Nobody in the audience had any idea what was about to happen. But Joey spotted Kevin, remembering him from the incident on the fire escape at his half-sister's apartment a few weeks earlier. Joey pulled out his gun, and he knew the game was over. Fleming opened fire. Simultaneously, as John fired, Joey blew his brains out with his own gun. The trial lasted the entire summer of 1989. When the verdicts finally came down, members of the Park Avenue Posse received sentences ranging from 19 to 33 years in prison. Another violent gang had been taken off the streets. another neighborhood could finally breathe again. That's what good detective work is all about. Patience, persistence, and never giving up. Just when we thought we finished one major investigation, another one was already waiting. This one would become one of the largest manhunts of my career. 2 names, Thomas Cross, Philippe Concepcion. And I'll tell you right now, they were unlike anyone we'd hunted before. Unbelievable. And the one thing I've learned about police work is just that when you think you've finished, another one is waiting right around the corner. And that's exactly what happened. The Park Avenue Posse was behind us. We take another gang off the street. But violent crime in the South Bronx was not slowing down. Not by a long shot. And the most amazing thing was when all of the cases that stick out, these 2 stone-cold killers, Thomas Cross and Philippe Concepcion, these weren't impulsive street criminals. They were disciplined predators. Bulletproof vests, 2 9mm pistols each, home invasions, murders, a trail of violence stretching from the Bronx into New Jersey and Connecticut. They believed they were untouchable. We intended to prove them wrong. We formed what was essentially an unofficial task force with Bronx homicide detectives John Tierney and Jimmy Finnegan. We practically lived together in those surveillance vans and cars. We turned days into nights, nights turned into mornings, coffee, stakeouts, dead ends, and every once in a while, a small break that kept the investigation moving forward. And that's what people rarely see about detective work. Most of it's not kicking in doors. Most of it's just patience. It's talking to people, listening, watching, waiting, trying to see one small thread that everybody else missed. In this case, it came from a surviving witness, a faded telephone number written on a wall, and something as ordinary as a Valentine's Day card. Something that's all it takes. That was all it took. One overlooked clue, one loose thread, one mistake made by someone who thought they'd committed the perfect crime. I confronted one of Cross's girlfriends. At first, she denied everything. Then I showed her that I had the Valentine's Day card she sent to him when he was on the run in Detroit, Michigan. And she had sent him money. So I had her for harboring a fugitive, and that was an enormous break. And in that one instant, she knew that I had her, and it changed the entire direction of the investigation. The FBI joined the hunt, and Cross was ultimately arrested in a Motel 6, outside of Motel 6, actually, in Toledo, Ohio. And Concepcion was captured on a snow-covered rooftop in New Haven, Connecticut. Between them, they received, respectively, Cross got 55 years to life, and Concepcion got 83 years to life. So Concepcion comes up for parole when he's 106 years old, and Cross comes up for parole when he's 84 years old. When it was all over and they were shipped up to Attica, I learned they had placed a contract on my life. People have asked me over the years if that bothered me. The honest answer was not really. You don't spend your career hunting violent killers expecting them to like you. If anything, I figured we were doing our job, and that's just the cost of doing business. And I wasn't scared of these guys. To me, they were all punks and cowards. And the fact is that we just continued moving along, locking them up in a 4-6, and a short time later, I'm on patrol with Kevin Tracy looking for some stick-up guys, and we saw a guy with a chrome handgun on Featherbed Lane, a foot pursuit, and up the stairs, onto the roof. And when it was over, we recovered, after a bit of a fight, not one loaded handgun, not 2, not 3, but 4. This guy was carrying 4 handguns on one guy. I'd never seen anything like it before. Every illegal gun we recovered represented one less opportunity for someone innocent to become tomorrow's victim. And that was important to us, super important. Another investigation took us over to Billingsley Terrace. Went over to Billingsley Terrace. We were investigating a violent stick-up crew when the front door suddenly flew open on the 5th floor and 4 suspects came charging out. One detail that has stayed with me all these years: the last man through the doorway was carrying a German Luger. Even in those days, that wasn't something you saw every day. I had never seen it before. But what happened next unfolded in seconds, but it stayed with me for decades. They bolted out the door, knocked me to the ground. We chased them down a winding staircase, like like an Alfred Hitchcock kind of staircase. It was an old Art Deco building. And he kept firing back up at us, turning and firing. And I kept firing down at him. As we pursued them through the lobby, they got lucky. 3 elderly Spanish men walked through the lobby door and were blocking our shot and prevented us from firing anymore. We captured 3 of them down the street anyhow because there was other radio cars coming in response, and we did get them and locked them up and recovered the gun. Then came January of 1995, the investigation that would end my NYPD career. My partner and I were interviewing a husband and wife inside their apartment on Grand Avenue. They'd been the victims the evening before of a violent home invasion. And we were trying to identify the crew responsible. The interview was interrupted while we were there. The apartment door burst open, and 3 armed men charged inside. Apparently, they were coming to finish off the victims. They didn't like leaving surviving living witnesses. That was a recurring thread in so many of our cases. They'd never want to leave a living witness to point them out in the future. And what happened over the next few moments changed our lives forever. When the smoke cleared, 2 gunmen were dead. 1 had been seriously wounded. 3 loaded semi-automatic pistols had been recovered. And both my partner and I had suffered injuries that ultimately forced us to retire from the New York City Police Department. After 13 and a half years, my career as an NYPD detective had come to an end. Or at least that's what I thought. What I didn't realize at the time was that God simply had another assignment waiting for me. After 13 and a half years, people have often asked me if that was one of the hardest days of my life. It was, but very quickly I realized that I wasn't finished fighting. I simply had to find another battlefield. In 1996, I founded Brosnan Risk Consultants in the basement of my home. No grand business plan, no investors, no boardroom, just me. And just a belief that the experience I'd gained on the streets of the Bronx, I could leverage to help protect people in the private sector. And 1 client became 2, and 2 clients became 10. 10 became 100. And year after year, we kept growing. I surrounded myself with the best and the brightest in all the leadership roles. And eventually that little company from my basement became one of the largest privately held security companies in America. More than 7,000 employees, operations in over 500 cities across 43 states. Millions of people protected every single day. When I eventually sold the company, people congratulated me on building a successful company. I appreciate that, but I never thought of it as simply building a business. To me, it was still police work. The only thing that changed was the uniform. Instead of protecting one neighborhood, we're protecting hospitals, office buildings, schools, shopping centers, Fortune 500 companies, houses of worship, just critical infrastructure all across America. A different assignment, same mission: protect good people from bad people. And today, that mission continues through Brosnan Consulting Services, where I work with corporations and family offices, public officials, and various organizations facing complex security challenges. It continues through my work with airspace defense, helping develop advanced counter-drone technology to meet the threats of tomorrow. But there was another mission that became deeply personal to me. In 2014, I founded the Archangel Blue Foundation after the heinous murders on December 20th, 2014 in Brooklyn of police officer Wenjin Liu and police officer Rafael Ramos. Over the years, I'd attended far too many police funerals. I'd stood beside grieving spouses, parents, children, brother and sister officers, trying to make sense of unimaginable loss. I wanted those families to know that they were never alone. That's why I commissioned an 11-foot, 1,700-pound bronze statue of St. Michael the Archangel, cradling a gravely wounded New York City police officer. Now, whenever an officer is murdered in the line of duty, we transport that statue to the officer's command. It stands there as a place of remembrance, a place of healing, a place where brother and sister officers, families, and complete strangers can come together to grieve, to pray, and to remember. It's one of the greatest honors of my life. In 2017, I launched with my partners the Save a Child program to help rescue victims of human trafficking. Those children deserve warriors too. You don't stop protecting innocent people because your career changes. You simply find another way to do it. And through it all, I've never stopped being that kid from the Bronx. I've never stopped believing that one determined person really can make a difference. You know, when I look back over my life, people sometimes assume it was all about the gunfights and the investigations, the arrests. They're certainly part of the story, but they're not the story. The story is really about purpose. It's about refusing to accept that violence and evil get the final word. It's about understanding that every robbery has a victim. Every homicide leaves behind a grieving family. And every child deserves to grow up in a safe neighborhood. And every police officer who pins on that shield each morning is making a promise to complete strangers. A promise that says, if your worst day ever comes, I'll be there. That's an extraordinary calling. I've been blessed to live it. And when I think back to that night in the Jolly Tinker, it's amazing how one moment can change an entire life. 4 armed robbers walked through the front door looking for money. Instead, they unknowingly handed me my future. Without those 4 gunshots, maybe I became a writer. Maybe I became a teacher. Maybe I spent my whole life doing something entirely different. We'll never know. What I do know is that God had a plan. He put remarkable people in my path. My parents, Ralph Friedman, Dennis Walsh, John Fleming, both Eddie Murphys, Jimmy Crow, Kevin Tracy, John Tierney, Jimmy Finnegan, so many were mentors, so many were great partners. But the monsters will always be out there. That's never going to change. What's important is that heroes are out there too. Ordinary people with extraordinary courage. Cops, detectives, firefighters, prosecutors, parents, teachers, neighbors. People who refuse to look away when evil walks through the door. That's what New York has always produced. Not perfect people, not superheroes, real people, tough people, good people. People willing to stand up when standing up costs something. That's what the Voice of Gotham is about. The monsters of New York were real. So were the heroes. And tonight, I wanted you to understand one thing about my story. The badge came off. The mission never did.